Hello and welcome to Beyond Top 10 Tennis. My name is Dr. Ashley Morgan-Berge and I'm your host. I'm the author of 11 books, a CEO of 12 years, the founder of a startup set on data privacy, and most importantly, an elite performance coach of over 18 years, having worked with athletes throughout Europe, the United States to Australia. And most excitingly, I am the world's leading scientist on coach and athlete performance, specifically behind uncovering how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking. That's right, it's a world first, something that's never been, found, discovered before, and we let the data do the talking because it's so incredible, phenomenal, and I guess that's why we're here. I'm behind theories from the optimal performance theory, the V by Dr. B, to the rule of transference. I've coined terms from the barrier breaker to the golden rule and a slew of others. And look, as has become custom in each episode, we dive into one of my books to share just additional insights and just dig that bit deeper. And look, we've been focusing on the secrets to optimal performance success, a comprehensive discussion on developing elite coaches and players. And look, today's episode is no different from the others. It's something I'm quite excited about to share. So look, as always, buckle in and enjoy the ride. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm really looking forward to today's episode, and you'll see why shortly. But look, if you've been listening to us for some time now, thank you so much. You know what we're about. But if it's one of your first episodes, thank you so much for joining us. But I'm sure you'll catch up soon enough. And look, today's episode, I think it's something really close to my heart because it's not really spoken about. I will say though, ideally in the last couple of years, I think more noise has been made around that, and which is sensational. And I think I'm going to date this episode a little bit by saying that I am based in Australia and the FIFA World Cup just finished, and we've had one of our most successful ever female sporting events, if not ever. And I know it's one of the most the noise that was made behind this women's team. So in Australia, there are Matildas, has been absolutely sensational, phenomenal, and in its own right, they've set new benchmarks. And you go, what does this have to do with tennis? And obviously that top 10 tennis ranking. And because today's episode, if you want to follow along, we are on page 183. But the topic for today is body image, self-worth, and athletes, a coach's responsibility. And I guess I think the reference to the World Cup and the Matildas in this respect, and obviously women's sport in general, because there are so many, I think, touch points there in respect to the developing athlete, but specifically females, so girls, women, etc., and who are often scrutinized in this way when it comes to their body image, or historically have been more so than their male counterparts, so boys. Although it has to be said that I understand also that boys do experience, and men, those own stereotypes and varying connotations in that respect when it comes to the body image. Although we do know what the research says and the data says when we're looking at vulnerabilities and a girl's perception of themselves. And this is a very big topic. It's huge, and you might I'm sure, I am positive, if you're listening, that you read up on it and whether it's in books, online, it doesn't matter where. We know there's essentially been an explosion around this topic, but I really want to, I think, narrow in on its applicability to the tennis landscape for that specifically, that developmental athlete, but more so from the coach's perspective. And certain controls that need to be put in place that are not. And I say this specifically because as someone, irrespective of the status that I've reached and all the accolades behind my name, those initial courses that every coach needs to go through from that, level 1, 2, 3, etc. And in nowhere throughout that curriculum is there education around this topic. And look, again, if you've been listening to us for some time, you're very familiar then with the body of work by myself, but also available through AMA International, because we wanted to make this accessible to everyone. So for the parents, the coaches, the players and athletes, opposed to a singular federation that is not sharing it with those specific coach education providers. So if you are one of those providers, the resources are available, obviously, for you to share. And I would encourage all coaches to parents out there who are interested in this topic to just make some noise around those providers to say that this content is very important, and it really is, I think, now more than ever so critical to be discussed and included, because there's such a fine line. And I think if you are a female listener out there, you have a very good understanding of where I'm coming from. Obviously, if you are one of the male listeners, it's not to take anything away from you. It's saying that there are more significant vulnerabilities in this respect or on this topic. Now, I'm saying this because predominantly and unfortunately in the tennis landscape, it's predominantly saturated with male coaches. Women coaches have become more frequent, although it's not the rule. I think if I was saying 80-20, so 20% female coaches would be incredibly generous. So I do not have, I think, the data or the statistics on that. If you do, if you're listening and you do, please send it through, because I would personally find that fascinating. And I would love to be able to share and I think contribute and build upon that even more, because it's so important. It's a huge piece of work that's often misconceived. So what happens, obviously, and this is again in life as well, because we do like taking that humanized approach, and I really try to incorporate that in each individual episode, because essentially when we're looking at that divide, it's applicable to the corporate world or the schooling system, irrespective, the wider community. There are still those the variances, so to speak. I'm not going to get into that. But when we're specifically looking at this dynamic, it's so important, if you do not have a female coach available to guide that girl, that female player, there's typically there can be lines crossed in respect to body image that really need to be cautioned on. The same can apply, obviously, for that male player, that boy, and varying connotations associated with that. Although that's very, I think, old school and stereotypical, because it's not necessarily how it is across the board. There are many coaches, males included, so male and female, that are very conscious of body image, irrespective if they're working with that male, that female, that boy, that girl, and they know how to handle it. So if you're listening, you're one of them, thank you so much. Thank you for joining the club. Thank you. Though it's so important, so you understand where I'm going. However, if we're looking at that 80-20, I would argue that that's the 20% of the coaches who understand that dynamic and their role in that respect. it's probably also said then that 80% are the ones who teeter on that line, who are borderline, who potentially leave those players, athletes more vulnerable than necessary. Because especially when we're looking at that adolescent age group and higher, so you could be that developing 13, 14, 15-year-old, we are very aware of the susceptibilities within that age group, but also when we're looking at that 18, 19, 21-year-old, etc., it's still apparent. Now, obviously, depending on the environment that athlete is raised in and how they've been conditioned, some areas are going to be, they're not going to matter because they've learned what to value and who to disregard, which is a very big skill. Although in this day where social media is more prevalent more than ever, you do unfortunately get those negative comments that are just, yes, they can be on a player's performance, although specifically you still get them across the board on someone's body image, which granted is incredibly distasteful and appalling, etc. So hopefully we're all on the same page there. But this is really about when we're looking at that coach's perspective and how they get to play a part. So I think that's enough of introduction in that respect. So if you want to follow along, please do, and let's dive in. Elite sport and the battle with body image is all too common. This can be avoided with the right team around the athlete. Why are athletes treated in this manner or made to feel poor self-worth about their body from a young age? Simple. Pressure to perform and coaching the whole athlete opposed to purely the performance is neglected. Now, I'll say that again. Simple. Pressure to perform and coaching the whole athlete opposed to purely the performance is neglected. So essentially what is being said there is that more often than not, the whole athlete is not accommodated. The pressure is so intense at times, which is purely based on performance. Now, their issues are bound to happen if that whole athlete is not accommodated, because body image is one part, but we're also looking at self-worth of that athlete. And we have had episodes that have touched on this briefly in the past, so I do encourage you to catch up on those episodes. But this is really saying that if you do not consider the whole athlete, you're missing out. And that's obviously a key proponent in an elite coaching pedagogy, which means if you are one of those coaches and you want to progress and you want your athlete to progress, this is a key facet to be included in those pedagogical underpinnings. If you choose not to, you are not, I guess, setting yourself up to align with those principles, but you're also doing your athlete that play a disservice of not being equipped with those tools to guide them along the pathway. Everyone out there has a mother, father, maybe sister or brother, even close friends, as well as teachers. Now, I acknowledge there are different dynamics here, so let's just play along. And hopefully, even close friends as well as teachers. And hopefully, if you're reading this, you are also into sport, so you would have already have had a coach. Now ask yourself carefully, how would you feel if someone, one of those people you looked up to, knocked your body image? This is a big thing. So first, it's important to rehash or preface there that it could be that parental figure, that parent or guardian, that close friend, and also that coach. And obviously today's episode we're focusing in on the coach and their responsibility. Though essentially we're looking at the adults in the room when we're looking from that player's athlete's perspective, and also their level of power. And this is a topic that we don't often broach, but I have in a lot of my work, because essentially it's a power tussle we talk about. Because coach-athlete relationships, there's a varying power dynamic. Best case scenario is that you work towards balancing that, which is often neglected. And it is also something that is so critical to be brought to a player's athlete's attention, that the capacity to balance that power is in their hands. Now, some coaches may not be a fan of this, but it's really saying it's a two-way street. So an effective coach-athlete relationship, it works both ways. So you can have a positive communicational exchange there that is reciprocated, and the levels of trust are included there. Obviously, the performance metrics that we've discussed in previous episodes, and we do a lot. But also that level of responsibility there, where the coach is that adult in the room, that is your role and it is your responsibility in that dynamic, irrespective of the shared power there on both sides. Because at the end of the day, you probably, or look up the episode Hiring and Firing My Coach. So for the coaches out there, again, the athletes are responsible for, just putting it really simple, firing the coach. So you want to make sure you build that relationship. Obviously, it works both ways, because that coach can say to a player athlete that they no longer wish to work with them. That said, when it comes to that power dynamic, finding that balance is incredibly healthy. So it's something obviously not to be ignored. But when we're looking at an athlete's, a player's body image, the susceptibility there, where they trust you as a coach, or they trust that parent and or guardian or that adult figure in their life, if a negative something along the lines is said about their body image and it's taken obviously in that negative context, it can be incredibly damaging. What if you were devalued as a person on a superficial level by those you admired, respected, or held in high regard? Now ask yourself, does anyone have the right to call you names in the first place? As coaches, it is your responsibility to protect your players from this, not to be a part of this devaluation. This is so important. I cannot tell you how many athletes that I've worked with over the years who have had some issue in some way, shape, or form. And I use the word issue lightly, and it's really a generalized word here, minus any type of connotation there. It's really to encapsulate, I think, problems that are internal and or external, but they've obviously been caused externally by another person. Unfortunately, a lot of these, I think, problems with the negative connotations initiate in the schoolyard. And again, we're looking at obviously that developmental spectrum here. If not on the schoolyard, it can happen sometimes on the performance grounds. However, more often than not, it's an even playing field there. Even though we'd like to think that the schoolyard there is, but I think we all know that's not the case. So it's more often these things do happen at school, and that tennis environment is that safe environment. And that's myself speaking, not only from experience, from how I've worked with athletes, but also during my days as a player. And it's sad but true, but it gives me that extra level of understanding and empathy with my players and athletes, knowing what it means for them to be able to rock up, go onto the tennis court, and know when it comes to their body image and their self-worth that they're protected, opposed to the potential negative ramifications to consequences, unfortunately, that do happen schoolyard, adolescence, etc. And it is a coach's responsibility here to empower that athlete, to empower that player to know they are valued, and to create that safe environment. And I won't go into my personal recount, however, this is something that varies depending on the club and or centre. if you do have a coach that comments on a player's athlete's body in any way, shape or form, no, that is unhealthy. Was I one of those athletes that experienced that? Unfortunately, I was. And that's not appropriate. However, I'll preface this by saying it was not said in an inappropriate context, but that's not the case. It does make that developing mind question, and that leads to other, I think, connotations there. So it's really about, from that coach's perspective, it's not about teetering along that line. It's being respectful of that athlete as a whole, treating them as a whole, and relaying, obviously, their worth to them. And body image is something for them to know that they can be proud of who they are, and irrespective, obviously, of their appearance, we are there on the court to work on their performance. Obviously, if there are certain, I think, performance gains that will come out of strengthening that player, for example, then you're going to work on strengthening that player. But it has absolutely nothing to do with their body image, because in turn, that's going to almost dehumanize then their self-worth. In an age where, unfortunately, a lot of emphasis is put on body image, whether you like it or not, a lot of people are raised to directly associate their body image with their self-worth. Most simply, self-worth is in reference to how you personally feel about yourself, how much you value yourself, and the regard and respect you hold for yourself, the worth you place on you as a human being. Now, the most empowering thing here is that I want to believe that every child is built with a full self-worth. It's not until they experience the knocks that self-worth drops, and it drops. And every player athlete's going to have varying levels of that. Fortunately, for most athletes, if they are in that environment, their performance begins to help rebuild that, which is a wonderful, I think, contributing factor. Although it does not remove that. So it's something, it's not the be all and end all, but it's incredibly important for a coach to be mindful of this. Now, if you're one of those parents listening, it's so important to be able to have that conversation with your child. And irrespective of their appearance on the outside, it is the adult's responsibility in the room to build that self-worth up. Because at the end of the day, it is not until these children progress through their teenage years to become young adults, where only then do they begin to learn the tools to rebuild themselves. And that is absolutely critical to get your head around, because it is not something a child can do and or fix. It is they are doing what they know or what they have learned, how they've been conditioned to respond. And so if you are a parent and or coach with that child, player, athlete that's, under that 18 years of age, they are susceptible. And typically the older athletes, 19 through to 25, they are still susceptible. They really are. And again, it's not their fault. It's what they've been conditioned towards, and that that the cause effect and those responses there. And if you are one of those adults that they can lean on, you have the incredible opportunity there to empower them, to guide them, because I am sure most, if not all individuals, all humans with that humanized approach have, I think, varying depictions of their own self-worth when it comes to their body image. Unfortunately, we do live in a world, a society that has varying connotations around, the physical self. Now, irrespective of what yours may be, if they are there, but let's say that they are there, think to yourself, wouldn't it be incredibly empowering if you could void those from that player, athlete, or child, to equip them with the tools, the coping mechanisms, the feedback, that positive feedback loop that can help empower them and build them in a more resilient way to counteract the negative implications of what it means to be a growing child, young adult in society. Now, I acknowledge it's quite loaded and it's a little bit off in respect to when we're looking at developing that top 10 tennis ranking. But think about it, I think, from this perspective then. An athlete who has so many, I think, negative connotations about their image, to their self-worth, how are they equipped then with the tools to ascend towards a top 10 tennis ranking? It all counts. And we've touched on this in previous episodes, that the foundations are absolutely fundamental. And I would argue also, if you are obviously ranked 50 in the world to the top 20 in the world, teetering on the top 10, your body image is probably okay. It's probably okay. Now, that's not to say that you may be unhappy with varying parts. That's not at all. It's really about, you've gotten to a point, it's okay, so it's not taking up your mental space. However, your self-worth, if it is not whole, it is. When I say it, if it's not whole, that means whatever isn't detracts. And it means that mental capacity that you want to be working on and progressing towards that top 10 tennis ranking is being countered. It's taken from you because your capacity is not whole. Potentially you're at 80%. So that 20%, that gap there, that is contemplating, thought-provoking in that sense, on and of your self-worth, detracts. So we want to build that well-rounded whole athlete that, yes, you believe in yourself, but also your self-worth is empowered by that. So we're filling those gaps rather than your mental capacity being elsewhere, opposed to fully focused on ascending, fully focused on your performance, fully focused on what specifically you are working on that given day, to progress, to implement, to improve, obviously to reach that next peak performance metric. So you are gradually progressing towards that top 10 tennis ranking. And I know that's a very long way of saying it, and all the, I guess, those inner workings there. But at the end of the day, it's actually quite simple, because if we're really being mindful and conscious of everything from our body image to our self-worth, they look after one another if we're surrounded by the right people and that right conducive environment. Coming from a coach's perspective, yet also from a researcher, scientist, PhD, touching on athletes' self-worth and the careful measures necessary in the coach-athlete relationship, a coach should never negatively influence an athlete-player's self-worth. They should do the exact opposite. Build it up. Build it up so high that the athlete has a resilient ideology of their self-worth, that they are a confident athlete, comfortable in their own skin, and that their performance is what it is all about, not how they look. And I think that's going to be the segment we finish on today, because it really surmises everything I think we've been leading towards, or what today's episode's about, because body image to our self-worth, they're tied together. Typically someone who has an incredibly high self-worth, they're quite comfortable in their own skin. But it's so important when we're looking at, I think, the earlier developmental side, so that that adolescent age group, that's where there is increased levels of susceptibilities around this. And it's also where we see the most, I think, prevalent drop-off. So there are athletes out there who want to progress towards a top 10 tennis ranking, and they drop. And when I say drop, that means they stop playing. Something goes missing. And more often than not, people think it's the athletes. And granted, they obviously play a part in that decision, but it's also the coach's responsibility. And if they've been able to engage that player athlete, because I guarantee you, if that player athlete child has a goal and they want to work towards it, of course they do. They want to keep working towards it. But if that negativity gets too much, if those negative connotations are shared and all those influences are felt, irrespective where they're coming from, but the training grounds, the environment of where that athlete is showing up, if they are not conducive towards those goals, towards that performance, is detrimental. And I think that's common sense. However, when we're looking again at an athlete's self-worth, that slowly and progressively knocks it back. So much to the point where that once dream of heading towards the top 10 tennis ranking, it starts to become more of a shadow, which is heartbreaking. Because we know, and I think that's the best part of the data, is that we know what it really takes. We know that the technical implications, we know the load, we know the progressions, we know the pathway, we know the long game, we know how to ascend, we know with those tools, we know from the player's perspective, we know from the coach's perspective what it takes, how you need to work together, how you need to build that optimal team and then ascend, and just what it takes to gradually and progressively get to 900 in the world, 500 in the world, 200 in the world, and break into the top 100, break into the top 50, and ascend closer to that top 10 tennis ranking. We know it's possible. We know the steps in place, but if you have an athlete that's suffering, their self-worth is suffering, their body image is suffering, that's your responsibility as a coach, and or if you're a parent out there, as a parent. But if you're one of those players, athletes, let me talk to you now, because if that's something that you're not comfortable about, that's something that has been quite a challenge that you're not too sure how to deal with, that's what the adults in the room are for. You should feel comfortable talking with your coach about this, and your parent and or guardian. If you do not feel comfortable, I would say it's time to get another coach. Try talking with another coach if you're at a center. And if that parent or guardian is not available for you to have that conversation, maybe one of your teachers is, when we're talking about this age bracket. Or you'll have another adult figure in your life to be able to have that conversation with. And please recall previous episodes when we've looked at the value of friendship and how we can leverage those friendships in the best possible way, where both are working towards that end goal, so that dream of developing that optimal performance, and how when all else fails, remember you've got one another in this context. So I acknowledge that there are very different dynamics out there, whether it's, two parents, one parent, just a coach, or it could be that guardian, or that big brother, big sister. Irrespective of what that setup is, there are still steps in place to head towards that top 10 tennis ranking, but also the access is there to have those discussions, from your body image to filling up your self-worth. That is so important. So I think on that note, we'll wrap things up, because your self-worth is absolutely critical. It's fundamental, and it's one of the best things you can have, and it's all yours. And especially you have to hold on to it when you're heading towards that top 10 tennis ranking. Thank you so much for tuning in today. To grab a copy of The Secrets to Optimal Performance Success, head on over to AM8 International. That is am8international.com. For any comments or questions, head on over to AM8 International or Topic Thread. That's the only social network I am on. Beyond Top 10 Tennis is available, whether it's on Threads, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, and there's probably another one out there. Our blogs are available on Medium or directly on AMA International under our news tabs. So you will find them there twice every week. So please come and say hi in any way, shape or form, because there are many outlets there. But specifically if you are listening on Spotify, we do have those polls to questions, and those I do personally review, and I will try to review all of the ones on social media too, so please don't be shy. It's a wonderful opportunity to share your thoughts, and hopefully I get to say hi and a big thank you for contributing in that way, and I really appreciate it. So for those of you who have left feedback in the past, thank you so much, and for those of you who are thinking about it, please do. If you'd like something different, head on over to Pink Octopus Books. That's where my fictional release is. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, follow, like. That would be absolutely phenomenal. And look, I think we're gonna finish on this note. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I am so incredibly grateful. I am your host, Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge, and this is Beyond Top 10 Tennis, and I'll see you next time.